The palace stood tall and imposing, a silent sentinel against the bustling city beyond its walls. Its towering spires and fortified walls seemed to whisper tales of old, stories of kings and queens, of battles fought and won, and of secrets buried deep within its stone heart. The palace was not just a building, it was a living entity, breathing history and exuding an aura of timelessness. The city around it buzzed with life, but within the palace walls, time seemed to stand still, preserving the echoes of a bygone era. Its stone facade, etched with the stories of centuries, held secrets whispered in the corridors of power and echoed in the grand halls of state. Each carving and engraving on the walls told a story, a piece of the puzzle that made up the palace's rich tapestry of history. The corridors, lined with portraits of past rulers, seemed to watch over the present, their eyes following every movement, every decision made within these hallowed halls. The grand halls, with their high ceilings and majestic chandeliers, had witnessed countless events, from royal banquets to clandestine meetings. It was a place of grandeur and splendor, yet amidst its magnificence a small drama unfolded, unnoticed by the stately arches and the watchful gargoyles. The palace, with its opulent interiors and dramatic settings, was a stage for both grand events and personal stories. The arches, standing tall and proud, had seen it all, from the grandest of celebrations to the quietest of sorrows. The gargoyles, perched high above, seemed to guard the palace, their stone eyes ever watchful, ever vigilant. A young woman, her face flushed with distress, struggled with an overflowing bag, its contents spilling onto the polished cobblestones. She had been in a hurry, perhaps late for an important meeting or an urgent errand, and now found herself in a moment of chaos. The cobblestones, usually so orderly and pristine, were now littered with papers and personal items, a stark contrast to the palace's usual order and decorum. Papers scattered in the wind, catching on the ornate lampposts and swirling around her feet like fallen leaves. The wind seemed to have a mind of its own, picking up the papers and tossing them around playfully, adding to the young woman's frustration. Each paper, a piece of her life, now danced in the air, mocking her attempts to gather them. The ornate lampposts, usually so elegant and refined, now served as obstacles in her path, catching the papers and making her task even more difficult. Her frustration was palpable, a silent cry for help amidst the indifference of the grand architecture. The palace, with its grandiosity, seemed indifferent to her plight, its stone walls and majestic structures offering no solace. She was alone in her struggle, a small figure against the backdrop of the grand palace, her distress a stark contrast to the elegance and serenity of her surroundings. The grand architecture, so awe-inspiring, now seemed cold and unfeeling, a silent witness to her moment of chaos. The sun beat down on the scene, casting long shadows that stretched from the palace walls like grasping fingers. The shadows seemed to reach out, as if trying to touch the young woman, to offer some form of comfort or assistance. But they were just shadows, intangible and fleeting, unable to provide any real help. The sun, high in the sky, illuminated the scene with a harsh light, highlighting the young woman's distress and the stark contrast between her chaos and the palace's order. It was a day like any other in the life of the palace, yet for the young woman, it was a moment of unexpected chaos, a tiny thread of distress woven into the grand tapestry of the royal court. The palace, with its centuries of history, had seen countless such moments, each one a small part of its grand narrative. For the young woman, this moment would be a memory, a story to tell, a lesson learned. But for the palace, it was just another day. Another story added to its rich tapestry, another secret whispered in its grand halls.
Standing at attention, his expression stoic behind the bearskin of his tall hat, was Thomas, a young guard newly appointed to the Royal Guard. The weight of his new responsibilities pressed heavily on his shoulders, yet he stood tall, embodying the very essence of duty and honor. Every fiber of his being was dedicated to the service of the crown, a dream he had nurtured since childhood. He had dreamt of this honor since he was a boy, and he carried the weight of his duty with solemn pride. The Royal Guard was not just a position, it was a calling, a way of life that demanded unwavering loyalty and an unbreakable spirit. Thomas had trained rigorously, enduring countless hours of drills and ceremonies to earn his place among the elite. His world was one of strict rules and unwavering discipline, his every action dictated by the rigid protocols of the royal household. The precision of his movements, the sharpness of his gaze, and the firmness of his stance were all testaments to his dedication. There was no room for error, no space for personal feelings or distractions. His gaze, trained to observe and report, fell upon the struggling woman. She was not part of his world, yet her presence was impossible to ignore. Her disheveled appearance and the scattered belongings around her painted a picture of distress that tugged at the edges of his consciousness. He saw her distress, the way her shoulders slumped with defeat, and the frantic fluttering of her hands as she tried to gather her scattered belongings. Each movement she made seemed to echo a silent plea for help, a cry that resonated deeply within him. The sight was a stark contrast to the order and discipline that defined his existence. A flicker of something unfamiliar stirred within him, a tug at the edges of his carefully constructed composure. It was a feeling he had long suppressed, buried beneath layers of duty and discipline. Compassion, empathy, a desire to reach out and help. These were emotions that had no place in the life of a royal guard, yet they surged within him now, unbidden and powerful. He knew his duty was to remain at his post, a steadfast symbol of the crown's authority. His training had drilled into him the importance of unwavering presence, of being a pillar of strength and reliability. To abandon his post even for a moment was unthinkable. It would be a breach of the very principles he had sworn to uphold. Yet the woman's helplessness resonated with a part of him that lay dormant beneath the layers of duty and discipline. Her vulnerability called out to his humanity, challenging the rigid boundaries of his role. He felt a deep, instinctive urge to step forward, to offer assistance, to bridge the gap between his world and hers. He was torn between the rigid expectations of his role and the unexpected call of human compassion. The conflict raged within him, a battle between the man he was trained to be and the man he felt compelled to become. In that moment, Thomas stood at a crossroads, his heart and mind in turmoil, as he grappled with the age-old struggle of duty versus compassion.
The woman's predicament deepened with each gust of wind, her papers now scattered across a wider radius. Passers-by, their faces etched with the indifference of the city dwellers, skirted around her and her scattered belongings, their eyes averted from her plight. She was an island of distress in a sea of unseeing faces.
Thomas watched, his internal struggle intensifying. He could no longer ignore the woman's plight. It was a small incident, insignificant in the grand scheme of his duties, yet it felt strangely significant to him. He knew he was stepping outside the bounds of his role, yet the call of his conscience was stronger than the dictates of his training.
Taking a deep breath, he broke his stance. With a determined stride, he crossed the distance between his post and the woman, his polished boots echoing on the cobblestones. As he approached her, his hand outstretched in a gesture of assistance, the woman looked up, her face etched with surprise. For a moment their eyes met, and an unspoken understanding passed between them.
He bent down, his movements swift and practiced, gathering the scattered papers with an efficiency that belied his initial hesitation.
The woman watched him, her initial surprise giving way to a wave of relief.
She joined him, her movements mirroring his as they worked together to gather the fragments of her day.
As they worked, a comfortable silence settled between them. It wasn't the silence of awkward strangers, but the silence of shared purpose, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forged over scattered papers, and a moment of unexpected connection.
He handed her a particularly important-looking document, its seal instantly recognizable as belonging to the royal architect.
Their fingers brushed for a fleeting moment, and he felt a jolt of awareness, a strange sensation that contrasted sharply with the regimented order of his world. The touch was unexpected, electrifying, a reminder that beneath the layers of duty and discipline, he was still capable of experiencing human connection.
He finished gathering the last of the papers, handing them to her with a slight nod. The documents were important, a testament to the bureaucratic machinery that kept their world in order. Each paper represented a piece of someone's life, a fragment of their story. He had handled countless such papers before, but today something felt different. His hand instinctively went to his belt, his fingers tracing the familiar outline of his sword hilt. The cold metal was a constant companion, a symbol of his authority and the power he wielded. It was a reassuringly solid presence, a reminder of his role, his purpose. The weight of the sword was a physical manifestation of the responsibilities he bore. It was a reassuringly solid presence, a reminder of his role, his purpose. The sword was not just a weapon. It was a part of his identity, a piece of the armor he wore to protect himself from the chaos of the world. It grounded him, kept him focused on his duty.
Yet, the encounter with the woman had shifted something within him, leaving him feeling slightly off balance. Her eyes had spoken volumes, revealing a depth of emotion that he was unaccustomed to seeing. It was as if her vulnerability had pierced through the armor he had so carefully constructed around himself. He knew he should return to his post, resume his position as a symbol of order and authority. The routine was comforting in its predictability, a series of actions that required no thought, only adherence to protocol. But today, the routine felt hollow, the motions empty. But the woman's distress, the vulnerability he had glimpsed in her eyes, stayed with him, a persistent counterpoint to the dictates of his training. Her face, etched with worry and fear, was a stark contrast to the stoic expressions he was used to. It was a reminder that beneath the surface of his rigidly defined world, there were real people with real struggles.
He was caught in a tug-of-war between his duty and his newfound awareness of the human stories that unfolded beneath the surface of his rigidly defined world. The conflict within him was palpable, a battle between the man he was trained to be and the man he was becoming. He had always seen his duty as black and white, but now shades of grey were beginning to emerge.
He looked at the woman, her face now composed, her shoulders no longer slumped with defeat. She had found a strength within herself, a resilience that he couldn't help but admire. Her transformation was subtle but profound, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure and overcome. Their eyes met once more, and he saw a flicker of gratitude in their depths, a silent acknowledgement of his unexpected act of kindness. It was a moment of connection, a brief but powerful exchange that transcended words. In that instant he realized that his actions had made a difference, however small. The weight of his duty felt lighter, the rigid lines of his world softening at the edges. He understood now that duty and kindness were not mutually exclusive. They could coexist, each enriching the other. As he resumed his post, he carried with him a newfound sense of purpose, a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to serve.